Welcome to Today in Media, the show where we take apart the 5 stupidest takes in the media. Who is going to reach number 1 today? Is it going to be Ezra Klein? Is it going to be the New Yorker? Who knows, but I am your co-host, Julia Nista.
And I'm your co-host, Kevin Daly.
And
Julia, what happened to Will?
Yeah, Will just disappeared.
Where'd he go?
He evaporated. He just went to thin air, and I think he went to the other side of the river.
What's on the other side of the river?
Somewhere.
Interesting.
Somewhere that we can't talk about.
Oh, understood.
I know. But it's okay because Kevin's here. There we go. And number 5 today, we're going to talk about Stephanie Ruhle, who said a little bit of street lingo on MSNBC today.
I mean, I find it all astounding. The backdrop, of course, Steve Bannon this weekend, who is President Trump's homeboy any way you slice it.
So Stephanie Ruhle tried to pull the whole awkward white girl appropriating street lingo on TV thing, and I don't think it really worked for her, not in my opinion.
Well, I wouldn't dream of commenting on any issues relating to cultural appropriation, so I leave all such annotations to your capable commentary.
Well, I'm just saying, I mean, she's definitely appropriating right here. It's like she kind of lived on the streets, like in a tent for 2 days. She was out, walking around.
She was an investment banker, as I recall, before she was in media.
So she's so well...
for Deutsche Bank, I believe.
Exactly. She knows exactly. She knows how to use this language totally well.
And it was my understanding that Bannon and the president are actually on the outs right now. I don't know how friendly they are.
Oh. Maybe not.
Maybe Stephanie's not keeping up with the news.
I guess she's not. She's sure keeping up with the street lingo, though. Anyway, number 4, we have Chris Hayes, who decided to have a hot take on the Constitution and Roy Moore today. He tweeted out something that I take a little bit of...
umbrage.
Umbrage, sure. Yeah, but what do you think about that, Kevin?
Well, I'll confess that I'm actually rather sympathetic to what Chris Hayes is saying. Roy Moore has twice been removed from judicial office for failing to abide by judicial orders. So if you're a person who's interested in the rule of law, it seems to me that Roy Moore is not the best avatar for that sort of thing. But I also would wonder where those concerns have been for the last 8 years. There were plenty of serious, non-frivolous arguments about the Obama administration's adherence to the rule of law that were kind of derided by establishment media types like Chris Hayes, and I think now whatever reservations he has about Roy Moore or about President Trump are in many ways the fruit of President Obama.
And I think you're totally right on that aspect. It's like, okay, you're going to go out and you're going to call out Roy Moore. Well, what about Kamala Harris? What about Maxine Waters? What about Richard Blumenthal? What about all these people that are currently in there? And it's like, thanks, Chris Hayes, for your hot take. Your all omnipresent knowledge about what's supposed to be going on that just so happened to appear now. But it didn't appear 8 years ago, and it didn't appear 4 years ago. So where were you, Chris Hayes, when that happened?
I think it does demonstrate why establishment media has a credibility problem.
Exactly, which brings us to number 3. The New Yorker, specifically Jane Meyer, came out with a piece about President Pence. I think that's a little interesting because President Pence doesn't exist, but what do you think about that?
It's unusual in a couple of dimensions. In the first place, it seems to me that lots of people in media can't quite figure out what they think about Mike Pence because on the one hand, there's all kinds of quiet speculation that Mike Pence would be a much better president than Donald Trump, and maybe President Pence is something that we should hope for. And on the other hand, there are people like this Jane Mayer, piece in the New Yorker that are constantly fretting about his retrograde views on social issues, and so nobody, right? Yeah. And so nobody can figure out what they think about Mike Pence. So there's something about Mike Pence coverage generally that just seems really sclerotic to me. Exactly. And then the big exchange that people have been talking about today are these comments that Trump made about Vice President Pence, that he wants to hang gays, that his pro-life advocacy has been totally frivolous and superfluous and unnecessary. And all this kinds of thing. But if you take a look at that particular portion of the article, the sourcing is incredibly dubious because in the span of a couple of sentences we get from Steve Bannon, who I think we can say is a person Jane Mayer doesn't take very seriously.
No, I totally agree. It's the whole idea of okay, you're going to use something and you're going to totally use it for an opportunity where you don't even have any general basis.
Yeah, and so in this paragraph we go from Steve Bannon to an unnamed advisor to somebody who was allegedly a witness to all of these comments that Trump made. And as Chris Geidner, who's a BuzzFeed Supreme Court reporter, pointed out, on Twitter, you've got levels upon levels upon levels of unreliable narrating happening there. So there's just something about that graph that struck me as a little bit dubious.
And I think it's kind of funny too. I mean, if you're going to look at other sources, first we have the first white president from Ta-Nehisi Coates at The Atlantic, and then we have the first white male president from other media sources, and now we have President Pence. And it seems to be going in this crazy, crazy narrative that's just, I don't know, ongoing.
Yeah, you're right. There just seems to be like a lot of open speculation about how long Trump is going to last in the White House, and we could like reasonably question the propriety of such comments.
And speaking of that, we have number 4 with Ezra Klein, where he tweeted out about Obamacare. He compared Obama to Congress, but then Trump to Trump, which to me is like comparing apples to oranges. I don't know. What do you think about it?
He seemed to really dismiss the like serious constitutional argument about these Obamacare subsidies that President Trump canceled late last week. Most of the legal argument against these subsidies emanates from the fact that these subsidies are not funded by an official appropriation of Congress. Rather, they are an appropriation that President Obama made himself, that the Trump administration has continued. And this is like there's a very serious argument about the legality of these subsidies that Ezra Klein just sort of blew right over.
You're right, and on that point too, it's like you're comparing Obama to Congress and Trump to Trump. Well, you should be comparing Obama to Obama and Trump to Trump, or Congress to Obama and Congress to Trump. But he's not going to do that because it's Ezra Klein, and that's what you expect from him.
And what's like continuously confusing to me is, why liberal journalists like Ezra Klein haven't held President Obama to account for how tenuous the Obama legacy is, right? I mean, the fact, that DACA could be rescinded, or the fact that these subsidies could be rescinded, are entirely the consequence of policy choices that Barack Obama made, and he has moral culpability in these situations that nobody's talking about.
Moral culpability, and Ezra Klein, thanks for not pointing that out. Which brings us to number 1, the most stupid hot take of the day. We have Tamika D. Mallory, who was a woman that started the Women's March along with a couple others, and she decided to tweet out today her experience with American Airlines. And so, as we can see, she blamed racism. Of course it's racism. It's always racism when it comes to people getting kicked off the plane instead of her actual behavior, which was below the bar. She was kicked off a flight because of American Airlines decided her behavior was not up to par as a person who was buying a seat should be. So I think that's kind of a ridiculous take from her. What do you think?
Well, she admitted to, exchanging vulgarities with, I think, the captain and maybe one other member of the crew. I'd further say that, we're only just learning about the situation, and so I want to reserve comment until we learn more. And there are obviously power dynamics here that we need to be relevant, that we need to be aware of. You've got a white pilot and a black female passenger. But what's odd to me is that we know, as Americans, that, the gate at an airport and an airplane are not places, are places where we conduct ourselves scrupulously, where we are on our best behavior, where we are quiet and attentive to the instructions that are given to us. And it seems to me sort of unusual and sort of not in keeping with what we know about travel, that you would want to get into a confrontation for any reason, no matter how in the wrong the pilot or members of the crew may be while you're on a plane. We know from experience you don't do that.
Exactly, and it's kind of like we have this precedent set. Of course the media are going to talk about this. Of course they're going to skew it in a light. And of course Tamika D. Mallory is going to skew it in her own personal favor. And it's like, what are we going to do now? We're just going to boycott all airlines because they're all racist? Just because you have a white pilot and you have a black passenger does not necessarily mean there's racism there. It just happens to be on the behavior and the level that American Airlines looks at their constituents and says, hey, you got to behave this way. But maybe you shouldn't, maybe you should not. Yeah.
And we all know that.
We all know that.
Yeah.
And it's pretty ridiculous. But anyways, guys, that was Today in Media. Go ahead, like, comment, subscribe, share. You can follow me at Julia_Nista.
And you can follow me at KevinDailyDC.
Thanks, guys, and watch next time.